Tokyo is the modern core of Japan, then Shinjuku, the famed and infamous ward in the capital's western districts, is Tokyo's beating heart. Home to more than 350,000 people, vastly more locals and visitors will make their way through Shinjuku on any given day. Shinjuku Station, the expansive and often confounding transit node in the ward center, is the world's single busiest train station. It sees approximately 3.6 million people pass through it on the daily. The station houses 35 train platforms, 52 if directly accessible substations are counted, connecting Shinjuku with a web of transit lines heading into, out of, and across Tokyo and the surrounding region, the world's most populated urban area. It's perhaps the most significant non-Shinkansen station on the Loop Line, sometimes called the world's most important train line, the Yamanote. To the station's west is the Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building, home to Tokyo Prefecture's vast bureaucracy, which moved to Shinjuku from Tokyo's old core to the east in the 1990s. But it's not just the massive station, governmental agencies, and business districts of towering skyscrapers that draw people to Shinjuku. Those three elements have created the basis for what Shinjuku may be best known for, its status as a massive nightlife and entertainment district. Yasukuni Avenue, lined with multi-use Sakyo buildings, where each floor hosts a different establishment, presents what is likely the single most identifiable image of Tokyo, perhaps rivaled only by the Shibuya Scramble. Behind those buildings lies Kabukicho, Japan's largest red light district, currently undergoing a patchwork whitewashing for the sake of the thousands of international tourists who unwittingly visit the area each day. Dozens of girls' bars and hostess clubs, innumerable drinking establishments including nearly 300 tiny bars in the narrow alleyways of Golden Gai alone, restaurants overhead and underground, and in the seedier alleyways and mid-rises near the love hotels, establishments offering paid companionship that blurs the lines of Japanese legality. It's all here in Kabukicho. Indeed, by the early 2000s, Kabukicho boasted some 8,000 sex shops, bars, pachinko parlors, karaoke clubs, game centers, and restaurants, and 200 Yakuza offices. Shinjuku is so vast and dense with establishments that it can be difficult to conceive of just how much activity is happening here at any time. And as with so many places in Tokyo, it can be hard to perceive what lies beneath the warrens of concrete, to look back in time and grasp what might have been here before the endless entertainment district. In fact, not 160 years ago, there was very little here at all, and yet the original Shinjuku, with its origins in the samurai past, offers a fascinating picture of urban change, and a surprisingly direct connection between the seedy entertainment of the feudal age and that of our modern day. Join us on a journey back into the not-too-distant Shinjuku past, and learn how one of the world's biggest entertainment and red light districts came into existence. Konnichiwa mina, and welcome to Unseen Japan. As always, I'm Noah Oskow, and today we're taking a deep dive into the history of a Tokyo... That's a baby talking. Of a Tokyo district I know and generally love, Shinjuku. See, I spent 2 years at Sophia University in Yotsuya, the easternmost part of Shinjuku Ward. As students, my classmates and I could ride the train line between our dormitory in western Tokyo Prefecture and the university essentially for free, and just one station on the way back westward was Shinjuku Station. Needless to say, the nightlife area to the east of the station became our Niwa, our stomping grounds. These days, I spend most of my time in Shinjuku leading excursions for Unseen Japan tours, whether explaining the inner workings of Kabukicho, attending tea ceremonies in Kagurazaka, or walking the old samurai post-town way. If you like what you learned today and are heading to Japan, give us a message. As Geography Now says, it's not selling out if it's your brand. Alright, enough preamble, let's dive into the Kyabakura shop and izakaya-strewn streets of Shinjuku. Now, it's safe to say that anyone who knows Tokyo at all knows Shinjuku. Even if shopping, drinking, and cavorting at host clubs isn't your style, the massive station's transit opportunities inexorably draw all towards it. But if you were asked to draw the borders of Shinjuku on a map, things might get a bit murkier. In an urban space with as incredible a train system as Tokyo, people tend to create mental maps based on the landscape that radiates out from the stations. Since we travel while watching the city slip by from train windows or in the dark of subway tunnels, we can miss the exact linkages and demarcations between different areas of the city. So for most, Shinjuku feels like the massive entertainment complex around the vast Shinjuku station. Now, you'd think looking at a map would make things clearer. In its broadest sense, Shinjuku is Shinjuku-ku, the Shinjuku ward, or Shinjuku City as the municipality prefers to self-designate in English. One of the 23 special wards that make up the former Tokyo City, itself disestablished in 1943, Shinjuku Ward is a local governance of 18.2 kilometers square, home to well over 300,000 people whose borders stretch into neighborhoods that few immediately think of as Shinjuku. In the ward's northeast, this includes the old geisha district of Kagurazaka. In its north, there is the university party town of Takadanobaba and the residential blocks of Ochiai. Other areas within the ward which possess a strong identity separate from Shinjuku include Yotsuya, Totsuka, Toyama, Ichigaya, and more. So what's the true heart of Shinjuku within the ward of Shinjuku? A map of the ward's districts, its machi, the next organizational step down from the wards, shows 3 locations with that designation. These are Shinjuku, the massive entertainment area east of the station, west or Nishi Shinjuku, the skyscraper district where the ward government building is located, and north Shinjuku, Kita Shinjuku, home to high-rises and some residential buildings. But if machi naming conventions define Shinjuku, then Kabukicho, machi in its own right, and the famed Shinjuku Gyoen Park, which is found within Naito machi, wouldn't count. And that can't be right, can it? To make the definition even more complex, some areas certainly feel like Shinjuku that actually aren't even in the borders of the ward at all. Take the north part of the Yoyogi Station area, so close to Shinjuku Station, or not far away from there, Minami, South Shinjuku Station on the Odakyu line. Not only are these not in Shinjuku, but rather in Shibuya Ward, but parts of Shinjuku Station itself are in Shibuya Ward. So as with many issues of geography, sense of place, and municipal borders, lines on the map don't tell the whole story. Sometimes, if something feels like Shinjuku, in a sense, it is Shinjuku. But where exactly did Shinjuku come from? The first clue to Shinjuku's origins lie in its name. For those who can read kanji, the Japanese ideographs, and know a bit about Japanese history, the general gist is easy enough to guess. Shinjuku literally means new post town. What exactly a post town was, and understanding Shinjuku's former status as one, requires a little more explanation. In the year 1590, the powerful warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu took control of the small castle town of Edo in the Musashino Plain. Tokugawa began the work of transforming this marshy expanse into an urban center, reclaiming land from nearby Edo Bay and creating a system of roads. When Tokugawa emerged as the undisputed ruler of all of Japan in the early 1600s, taking the title of shogun, his stronghold of Edo evolved from a frontier backwater to the de facto capital of the entire archipelago. The Tokugawa also instituted a system known as Sankin Kotai, or alternative attendance, which necessitated that all samurai lords live every other year in the city. When the year was up, a given lord would return to his own domain in the countryside, leaving his wife and firstborn son behind. This system, essentially one of hostage-taking, meant to prevent any potential uprising, had the secondary effect of assuring that Edo would also have a major samurai population. Each lord would need a massive retinue to help run and guard his residence in the city. Commoners also flocked to Edo to create an economy based on serving this massive warrior population. By 1721, the city had over 1 million people and had become the biggest city in the world. Within 150 years, Edo would take on a new name: Tokyo. Shinjuku, however, was not part of this feudal metropolis. It sat outside the western gates of Edo, where a road ran towards the city. This road was the Koshu Kaido, one of the 5 strictly controlled highways that directed movement across the archipelago into the samurai capital. Each road had its own system of officially designated shukuba, post towns where samurai and lordly retinues or weary travelers could rest, take on supplies, and cavort at chaya, tea houses which also provided alcohol and other indulgences. For the first 100 years during which the Tokugawa shoguns ruled Japan from their capital of Edo, the area that is now Shinjuku was known as Naito-machi. a mere collection of villages and farmland along the final stretches of the Koshu Kaido Road. The area was so called as it was home to a secondary mansion for the Naito clan, mostly used in case the Naito lord needed to flee his primary residence in the city proper. The Tamagawa Aqueduct, a major civil engineering milestone and one of the most important sources of drinking water for Edo, ran beside the road. The closest designated Shukuba post town was further to the west. This was the joint lower and upper Takaido Shuku towns, located a distant 10 kilometers from the entrance to the city. This posed a major inconvenience to the increasing numbers of commoners, samurai, and lords traveling on the Koshu Kaido as Edo's population and importance expanded during the first century of Tokugawa rule. In 1697, a group of merchants from Edo's northeastern temple district of Asakusa, knowing a good business opportunity when they saw one, petitioned the shogunate for the right to open a new shukuba on the Koshu Kaido. This one was to be closer to the city itself. The shogunate, seeing the sense in the petition, allowed this initial group of 10 to begin the work necessary for a new post town. The chosen spot was the fork in Naitomachi, where the Koshu Kaido split into a branch route known as the Ome Kaido. The merchants began a process of road widening and leveling, and by 1699, the new post town was ready for business. It took the name Naito Shinjuku, the new Naito post town. Soon it even had 24 surrounding hamlets that were officially obliged to supply labor and horses for the new post town. One of these was known as Tsunohazu Village, the area we now know as Kabukicho. The Naito Shinjuku post town was not located directly next to the area now mostly associated with Shinjuku, that being the region directly surrounding the modern train station. Rather, it was a bit further east. There it stretched for about 1 kilometer from what is now Shinjuku Sanshome to the western edges of Yotsuya. Its endpoint was the Yotsuya Okido, the Great Gate that barred entry into Edo proper. The Naito Shinjuku post town consisted of a road running for about 1 kilometer or 3,330 feet at a width of about 10 meters, 33 feet, with low wooden buildings on either side. Many of these were hatago, general lodging for travelers. Others were chaya tea houses, with a wide variety of stores, stables, and the occasional Shinto shrine and Buddhist temple. Daimyo, the samurai lords, would usually only deign to stay at great honjin houses reserved for their services, but Naito Shinjuku, which saw a relatively small amount of lordly traffic, only occasionally had a designated honjin building. In fact, only 3 samurai domains regularly used the Koshu Kaido Road for their annual processions into or out of Edo. Now, things weren't immediately all roses and mitarashi dango for Naito Shinjuku, however. The post town was hit by 2 major fires within the first decade and a half, one in 1702 and one in 1716. These necessitated major rebuilding efforts and put the Asakusa merchant group into arrears on money owed to the shogunate. Worse news still was awaiting the post town, however. In 1718, the samurai government ordered that Naito Shinjuku be struck from the list of official shukuba after only 19 years of operation. The exact reasoning for the shutdown order has been subject to rumor and legend, but the official word from the shogunate related to the small number of travelers on the Koshu Kaido, and an issue that fits more within the modern conception of Shinjuku: moral panic over the presence of women of loose virtue. One peculiar type of service person to be found at the shukuba was the meshimori onna, literally the meal-serving woman. While these women did provide food at restaurants and inns, they also offered other, more intimate services. Meshimori onna were part of the milieu at Naito Shinjuku from its earliest days, and were a major attraction that brought visitors to the post town. In fact, the appeal of the drinking and partying establishments was a significant basis for the shukuba economy, since the official purposes of the post town, relaying people and packages and providing lodging, had to be done at designated prices that made things difficult for the town's bottom line. All 4 of the great post towns at the gates of Edo, Naito Shinjuku, Itabashi, Senju, and Shinagawa, steadily evolved into party towns, even attracting denizens within Edo to make day trips beyond the city's gates for drinks and debauchery. Unfortunately for Naito Shinjuku, the shogunate looked askance at their officially designated post towns becoming dens of iniquity. The samurai government went through regular periods of moral panic, and as early as 1617, the Tokugawa had ordered that only a single place in Edo be allowed for prostitution: the great pleasure quarters of Yoshiwara, north of Asakusa's Sensoji Temple. As Naito Shinjuku began drawing more and more visitors hoping to acquaint themselves with Meshi Moriona, the town also drew the ire of the larger pleasure quarters. The official licensed quarter in Edo issued a complaint regarding the unlicensed brothels in the post towns. The story also goes that the lordly Naito family became embroiled in the scandals of the post town that bore their name. A younger brother of Lord Naito Shingozaemon had become a regular at the brothels of Naito Shinjuku. One day, the brother had drunkenly tried to force a Meshi Moriona from a certain inn to leave with him. The staff ganged up on him and beat him to a pulp. When he showed his bloodied face at the family mansion, Lord Shingozaemon felt a burning shame. The Naito clan had already been made to give up much of their land in the area for the construction of the official post town. Now the lord's own brother was cavorting about the local alleys like a licentious fool. Shingozaemon ordered his brother to commit ritual suicide and brought his head to the local shogunate officials, begging them to shut the post town down. Now, whether the story of samurai fratricide is historically true or not has been debated. Either way, the shogunate was moving into an era of financial and moral reform upon the ascension of the 8th Tokugawa shogun, Yoshimune. Naito Shinjuku had gained a reputation as one great brothel, and with only a few samurai lords using the Koshu Kaido for their annual travels to Edo, it seemed the new post town was more trouble than it was worth. Naito Shinjuku was struck from the official list of Shukuba and quickly fell into decline. Despite repeated requests that it be reinstated, it would take more than half a century for it to regain its former status. But in 1772, Naito Shinjuku was finally reborn. During the intervening 54 years, agricultural development of the western plains near Edo had continued afoot, and the Koshu Kaido gradually grew in importance. At the same time, the major Shukuba had continued to face financial difficulties, with official prices simply being too low. At long last, the shogunate retracted its policy limiting prostitution in the post towns. It was the dawn of a new age of commercialism over moral policing. The same activities that had caused the downfall of Naito Shinjuku were now a main impetus for its revival. Opened again for business, the post town quickly blossomed into a feudal-era transit and entertainment hub very similar in spirit to the iniquitous Shinjuku we know today. The heyday of the reborn Naito Shinjuku post town would last for less than a century. Meanwhile, Edo continued to grow, and the surrounding Musashi Plain became a more important site of agricultural production for feeding the hungry metropolis. The post town, which saw little foot traffic in its original late 17th century iteration, grew in significance and size. Its entertainment and housing facilities spilled out from its original kilometer perimeter, reaching further down the Koshu and Ome roads to the town of Tsunohazu, which is now Kabukicho, and the Yodobashi Bridge, now on the border of Shinjuku and Nakano wards, and the namesake of the major Yodobashi camera brand. With the dawn of the 1850s, however, the post town was about to be rocked by a seismic event, one that signaled a sea change for all of feudal-era Japan. In July of 1853, 4 American warships bristling with cannon sailed through the entrance of Edo, which is now Tokyo Bay. The squadron was led by Commodore Matthew Perry, with strict orders to finally open Japan to Western trade after 2 centuries of self-imposed isolation. Japan would never be the same. What followed the so-called opening of Japan was 15 years of deep unrest and social change, as the weakened samurai government tried and failed to resist challenges to its authority. In 1862, the shogunate relaxed most of the alternative attendance regulations, making the required stays in Edo less frequent and allowing wives and firstborn sons of lords to return to their home provinces. The shogunate intended this relaxation to allow samurai lords to focus on national defense. Instead, it emptied out Edo. The raison d'etre for the city and the post towns that led to it had been greatly diminished. By 1867, when the Meiji Restoration toppled the Tokugawa dynasty and restored the emperor to political control, Edo had lost half of its population. Inevitably, Naito Shinjuku was reduced to a near wasteland as well. And yet, this was far from the end for the now defunct post town. On September 3rd, 1868, the new imperial government of Japan renamed the old samurai capital of Edo to Tokyo. This eastern capital was reborn as the new seat of the emperor, and a series of modernizing measures were put into effect. The new city of Tokyo mostly existed within the borders of Old Edo, with Naito Shinjuku just outside of its municipal territory. The population of the surrounding region slowly rebounded. Though diminished by the end of the Shukuba system, the area directly around the old post town persisted. In 1872, the imperial government issued a proclamation of liberation for all women of the pleasure quarters. This had the effect of weakening the old Yoshiwara in old eastern Tokyo, while allowing Naito Shinjuku to flourish under a new system of prostitution. The old Hatogaya inns of the post town were converted into karizashiki, rooms for rent, out of which now personally licensed women could work their trade. This was an era of great change, with new technologies, modes of transport, fashions, and mores. The men visiting Naito Shinjuku, who only years before had worn kimono and straw sandals, were shortly venturing into the district in suits and bowler hats. For Shinjuku, however, the greatest change of all would come via a newfangled technology of mass transit, trains. When Japan's first private railway company, Nippon Tetsudo, opened Shinjuku Station in 1885, the samurai government was only 17 years in the rear view. The station was built to the lightly populated west of Naito Shinjuku, and despite bypassing the old Shukuba, the station was still close enough to allow visitors to reach its entertainment district on foot. A small suburban station on the line between eastern Shinagawa and even more distant Akabane, 2-car steam engines would depart Shinjuku every hour and a half. The average daily passenger statistics showed only 50 people, and there were even days when not a single passenger embarked or alighted from the trains. A far cry from the heyday of the nearby Shukuba or the Nightlife district to come, the only entertainment district next to the station itself was a small grouping of tea houses. Much of the surrounding area to the west, north, and south was still farmland. Even 2 decades later, foxes were known to live in the weed-strewn plots around the station. By 1900, however, the city of Tokyo was growing, and this suburban station was gaining significance as a hub. New lines were added, and the station building was rebuilt and enlarged. In 1920, the borders of Tokyo City expanded, and the eastern parts of Shinjuku finally joined Tokyo proper. It was 1923, however, that was perhaps the most important year in Shinjuku's history since Naito Shinjuku closed down. On Saturday, September 1st, a massive earthquake struck the Kanto Plain, with resulting firestorms raging across the entirety of the old eastern part of the city. As many as 140,000 people died, and 2.5 million people were left homeless. With the merchant quarters of the old Shitamachi, the downtown of Edo, left in ruins, an exodus towards the relatively untouched areas of western Tokyo began. The Shinjuku area, lying on the very edge of Tokyo proper and with good access via its various train lines, suddenly became a desirable neighborhood. Major department store brands like Mitsukoshi and Isetan relocated to the area. The westward exodus was so extreme that by 1927, this once insignificant train station was already the busiest in all Japan. The mass expansion of Shinjuku, now a modern transit, residential, and shopping hub, made some of the bawdier aspects of old Naito Shinjuku feel untoward. The main street of this red light district was slowly cleaned up, and the rooms for rent moved into the back streets. Nonetheless, these legacy businesses from the feudal era remained all the way until the full illegalization of prostitution in the decades after World War II. Even thereafter, Shinjuku has remained Japan's biggest red light district in both a legal and illegal sense. Shinjuku also took on a less than appealing appellation, the anus of Tokyo, Tokyo no Komon. Indoor plumbing was one of the last advances in modern living to fully penetrate the city. Instead, night soil vendors continued to walk the city at night, purchasing bodily waste from residents to resell to the farming villages just outside of Tokyo. As the urban sprawl of the capital began to swallow up farmland, however, the effort of hauling waste from the center of the city to an ever more distant countryside increased in difficulty. Shinjuku, still on the comparative edge between city and country, was often clogged with hundreds of night soil carts heading to the farmland. Add to that the horse dung from carriages in the brief decades before gas and electric conveyance fully took over, and you can see why this city gateway took on such a dubious bodily honorific.
私たちの生活の中に時を嫌わず無遠慮に侵入してくるこの匂い。いくら我慢してみてもやっぱり逃げ出したくなります。
But not all aspects of Shinjuku were of such ill repute. In the mid-1920s, as trolley lines began connecting Shinjuku to the Tokyo interior and buses radiated out from a new, enlarged Shinjuku station to the ever-growing western suburbs, Shinjuku became a prime destination for film-going and theater. The Musashino-kan Cinema opened in 1920 and was soon among the best-loved theaters in Tokyo. It specialized in foreign cinema and featured top-level benshi, skilled narrators for silent film. Meanwhile, the legendary Moulin Rouge Shinjuku-za opened in 1931, offering both titillating and edifying revue-style performances. In 1927, a new bookstore, the Kinokuniya, appeared to fulfill the reading interests of local students, housewives, and a new type of worker, the salaryman, a group whose numbers swelled in the metropolis every year. The company had originally been a dealer of lumber and charcoal in Yotsuya, due east of Shinjuku, but the 1923 earthquake forced the storefront to Shinjuku, where the founder reimagined the company as a bookseller. Their original location included a second-floor art gallery, perfect for the modern bohemian aspirations of the up-and-coming Shinjuku district. Restaurants and cafes helped whet Tokyoites' appetites for new foreign foods. As but a single example, in 1909, the Nakamuraya bakery moved into Shinjuku. The shop was run by a husband-wife duo of philanthropist, pan-Asianist restaurateurs named Soma Aizo and Koko. Aizo invented and popularized the Japanese cream puff, and the pair used their funds to open a salon next to the shop that served as a meeting point for artists and political thinkers of the day. The two also provided a hideaway for the exiled Indian revolutionary Rash Bihari Bose, who married their daughter. Upon Bose's urging, in 1927, Nakamuraya introduced the first authentic Indian curry to the Japanese market. Nakamuraya's curry remains legendary. Emergent Shinjuku, once a comparative backwater post town, was on the ascent. As an entertainment district, it was slowly eclipsing the two great neighborhoods of the era, Asakusa and Ginza. As a site for vaudeville and theater, it had much in common with the much older Asakusa, and a more modern, if less classy, feel than the rarefied air of Ginza, with its high-class geisha. To its south, another new town, Shibuya, was growing up as a secondary Western transit and entertainment hub, but was not yet at the same level. The west of Shinjuku was still comparatively subdued, following the legacy of the Tamagawa Canal that ran to its above-ground terminus at the Great Yotsuya Gate. A vast water purification plant had been established in the area in the early post-restoration decades. The aging samurai-era water infrastructure had become a source of disease for the vast city, with cholera breaking out in the 1880s. In 1899, the Yodobashi purification plant officially opened, providing all of Tokyo with clean, reliable water. The plant, a vast open-air aquifer, occupied much of Shinjuku west of the station. Interwar Shinjuku was a raucous, cosmopolitan town. Yet by the 1930s, elements of what attracted Tokyoites to the district, flashiness, westernized drinking and eating, foreign films, plays, and books, also set local businesses up for conflict with an increasingly controlling and xenophobic government. On the business end, rationing and product bans started with the onset of the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945, and had a major cooling effect. The sale of food, clothing, and luxury items was all tightly curtailed. Worse still, many of the men working in the nightlife and entertainment districts were being drafted to the front. The wartime government banned most dance and beer halls. Revelry came to a standstill. Much of Shinjuku emptied out. Things only got worse as the Pacific War began in the early 1940s. The famed Shinjuku Moulin Rouge was subject to a clear example of kotobagari, the hunt for foreign words. The French name of Moulin Rouge, based on the legendary Parisian cabaret, disappeared. In its place, the theater took on the quotidian Japanese name of Sakubunkan, the Hall of Composition. The house's scripts, known for their colorful satire, were subject to censorship. Military police, the dreaded Kempeitai, watched over performances, ready to stop unpatriotic departures by performers or outbursts by the audience, many of whom were now young men in uniform. On the streets outside, parades for departing soldiers and fire preparedness drills overtook the former crowds of merrymakers. Even alcohol, the lifeblood of the party scene of Tokyo, was hit with censorship. Amidst rationing of base materials, with precedence given to feeding the military, each year from 1937 saw taxes on booze raised to help provision the war effort. In 1943, the government went a step further, unifying the various beer brands and eliminating trademarks and individual labeling. For years, illuminated signs for a bisu beer had guided Shinjuku patrons to establishments where they could drink that mildly fancy brew. Now, a bisu beer was no more. In its place, and in the place of the foreign word beer, biru itself was a unified label for bakushu. Beer itself was now merely literal barley alcohol. The culture of Shinjuku was gravely shaken by wartime deprivations. Soon, the district's environs themselves would face physical oblivion. In July of 1944, the onslaught began. In that month, the American military retook the Japanese-occupied island of Saipan in the Northern Marianas, using the island to launch a mass firebombing campaign against the Japanese mainland. The campaign meted out wholesale destruction of much of the urban space throughout Japan, with the capital of Tokyo seeing an especially stark level of death. 20 years earlier, Shinjuku was spared the devastation of the Great Kanto earthquake. This time, the district would not be so lucky. The worst came on April 13th and May 24th and 25th of 1945, when B-29 bombers filled the skies above Shinjuku. Approximately 55,000 homes in the area were reduced to ashes by their fiery payload. Fires enveloped the streets of the entertainment district, reducing 80% of what would become the whole of Shinjuku Ward to a field of smoldering debris. On March 10, 1945, the Tokyo Great Air Raid resulted in the death of over 100,000 people across Tokyo in a single bombing raid. In Shinjuku, most children had been evacuated to the countryside. Nonetheless, countless people were killed. When those who had evacuated or fled finally made their way back to war-torn Tokyo, the district was an unrecognizable expanse of debris and gutted-out buildings. Some large concrete edifices remained amidst the rubble, the Mitsukoshi, the Isetan, and a few others. Surprisingly, the Shinjuku Gyoen Gardens had been spared and offered a green respite in the midst of the ruins. On August 15, 1945, 9 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and 7 days after Nagasaki suffered the same fate, Emperor Hirohito made his historic radio broadcast announcing the surrender of Japan. The vast majority of Shinjuku lay in ruins. But on the 20th, 5 days after the stunning end of the war, a hum of activity was already underway amidst the debris. The Shinjuku Black Market was open for business. The first of the great black markets of occupation-era Japan, the Shinjuku Yami-ichi, was the brainchild of Ozu Kinosuke, boss of the Ozu Gang, a local Yakuza organization. With advertisements placed in major newspapers, Ozu had recruited small-time factory owners whose contracts had been with the now defeated imperial military and other entrepreneurs with something to sell. Their makeshift stalls, tightly controlled by the Yakuza, became a lifeline to the desperate people of Tokyo. Within a few weeks, the market even had its own twinkling, startlingly optimistic billboard reading "Light from Shinjuku," Hikari wa Shinjuku yori. Surely this was a strange sight amidst the utter devastation. Shinjuku was an ideal location for such a huge post-war market. Much as with the Great Kanto earthquake, the vast conflagration of the Allied firebombing had driven Tokyoites from central Tokyo into the western suburbs. As it had for centuries, Shinjuku stood as a junction between the population of the west and the capital proper. For those still living in the ruins of central Tokyo, and families living with relatives in the relatively untouched west, the black markets of Shinjuku lay amidst the convenient hub of Shinjuku Station, a hub that had become all the more convenient as the train, bus, and trolley lines stuttered back to life. The Ozu Gang ran the huge black market next to the Shinjuku East exit. This was called the Shinjuku Market, the Shinjuku Maketo, and played host to over 70,000 shopkeepers and peddlers. Still, the Shinjuku Station area was vast enough and the demand in poverty-stricken Tokyo great enough that each major exit had its own black market lorded over by a different Yakuza gang. The west exit had the People's Market, the Minshu Maketo, run by the Yasuda gang. The southeast exit had the Wada Market, named after its own Yakuza operators. Soon, over 300 black markets had blossomed across the blighted Tokyo landscape, and similar sights could be seen in cities around the country. In 1949, the black markets were finally dismantled by order of the occupation forces. At this point, various of the original Yakuza market ringleaders were in jail, and the hundreds of black market stalls were shifting from hawking fenced necessities to selling booze and noodles. As noted in the great book on the urban development history of Tokyo, Emergent Tokyo, these measures did not treat black market merchants as a criminal element to be pushed out of society, but rather as a group worthy of reasonable accommodation that could be integrated into plans for the next stage of post-war development. The east exit Shinjuku market businesses were moved into a series of row houses half a kilometer from the station, and this is the now famous Golden Guy, home to nearly 300 tiny drinking establishments. Originally, many of these were brothels, but the 1956 banning of prostitution put a kibosh on that business structure. From the 1960s until the 1980s, the narrow bars of Golden Guy were a beloved haunt for artists, actors, and activists. Omoide Yokocho, the station area's other famous Yokocho space, similarly emerged from the west exit black market. This was first known as Lucky Street, featuring a series of tiny outdoor stalls separated by sliding door frames. It would later take on the less appealing sobriquet of Shonben Yokocho, Piss Alley, thanks to the main drag's sole bathroom space. Omoide Yokocho, which means side street of memories, is a more recent naming attempt to spruce up the neighborhood's image. The Lucky Street black market stalls sold the only meat they could get their hands on during the controlled economy under the occupation: entrails and offal, unwanted cuts from the cows and pigs used to feed the occupation troops. Even today, half of the izakaya that make up Omoide Yokocho sell yakitori and motsunabe, offal hot pot. The Shinjuku black market was a place of strange tensions. It provided an invaluable source of everyday goods for a devastated populace, but often did so at prices that gouged that same populace. It was a site where violence often erupted between competing gangs, but also one where Japanese and non-Japanese former imperial subjects worked alongside each other in relative harmony. It served an important purpose, but became a feared symbol for the breakdown of law and order, and in particular, the rising threat of foreign criminals. In some ways, little has changed. In the early years of post-war occupation, a major change occurred to the breakdown of wards and towns within Tokyo. During the war, Tokyo City itself had ceased to exist in 1943, replaced by 35 wards within its old border. By war's end, the area that's now Shinjuku was split between 3 of these wards: Ushigome and Yotsuya to the east within the borders of Old Edo, and Yodobashi Ward to the west. After the war in 1947, the 35 Tokyo wards were reorganized into the 23 we know today. Ushigome, Yotsuya, and Yodobashi all at last agglomerated into our modern Shinjuku ward. Not that this municipal reorganization initially had much impact on the ground, where the black markets were in full swing and abject poverty still reigned. Much of the new Shinjuku ward consisted of hovels and makeshift communities near Quonset huts. The civilian government sought to change this. Disempowered on a national level by the ever-watchful Allied occupation, the local governments turned their focus towards domestic uplift. From 1945, Tokyo's revitalization policy was led by urban planner Ishikawa Hideaki. He was soon approached by Suzuki Kihei of the Shinjuku Revitalization Land Readjustment Union, try saying that 3 times fast, with an intriguing plan: turning the devastated Tsunohazu neighborhood east of Shinjuku Station into a major entertainment district, with a kabuki theater at its heart. This was the birth of Shinjuku's modern linchpin, the ever-popular, ever-infamous Kabukicho. Tsunohazu had been a marshy village that hosted a samurai lord's mansion in the olden days. Pre-war, it featured a girls' school and mixed residential and shop fronts. Then, a firebombing raid on April 13, 1945, had destroyed all that. Now, Ishikawa, Suzuki, and landowner Mineshima Mohei envisioned a grand 1,850-seat kabuki theater, christened the Kikuza, as the centerpiece of a massive entertainment district to rival the old Naito Shinjuku. To help gin up excitement for the new development, they petitioned the city government to officially change Tsunohazu Town's name to Kabukicho, Kabuki Town. Ironically, the building of the Kikuza Theater faltered as funds ran out, so Kabukicho famously lacks the building that was to be its namesake. Nonetheless, the entertainment district would eventually eclipse anything Ishikawa and Suzuki had originally envisioned. Now, Kabukicho's early days met with some setbacks. In 1950, a major cultural products expo set in the new Kabukicho, the Shinjuku Gyoen and Nishi Shinjuku Square failed to generate much revenue. The expo sites were sold off piecemeal. However, the land division set up for the expo in Kabukicho became the basis for the outline of the entertainment district we still know today. In the expo pavilion's place emerged cinemas, batting centers, bowling lanes, and theaters. In 1956, the Shinjuku Koma Theater came into being at the end of the wide avenue. This 2,088-seat theater became a major landmark and operated until 2009. Its location is now the Shinjuku Toho building, atop which the Hotel Gracery and giant Godzilla head soar. Alongside these were venues that harken back to the old industries of nearby Naito Shinjuku. Love hotels and so-called Turkish baths, which now go by a different name, soaplands. In the 1980s, the name of these businesses was changed when the Turkish embassy complained of the derogatory association. In 1956, the government banned prostitution, greatly altering the economic basis of the sex industry in Shinjuku. However, with the law only affecting direct penetrative acts, this had the unique result of propagating a wide range of new intimacy-adjacent businesses, only barely skirting this red line. Kabukicho became one of the major sites for the development of this expansive new industry, and by the 1970s had emerged as the biggest red light district in all of Japan, and indeed one of the biggest in the entire world. As might be expected, much of this gray area commerce happened under the aegis of various Yakuza groups vying for Kabukicho turf, with businesses paying protection money. Now let's momentarily examine this term red light district that gets used so often with Kabukicho. It tends to inspire foreign visitors to imagine the open windows and literal red lights of Amsterdam. Japanese law, however, states that these businesses must not have windows that reveal shop interiors and keep advertising to a minimum. This means that the streets of Kabukicho conceal much more of this industry than foreign visitors expect from one of Asia's largest such districts. Those expecting a more titillating street-side experience may find things surprisingly tame. In Kabukicho, it all happens behind closed doors.
At San Francisco, peace-loving nations near success as delegates arrive at the War Memorial Opera House for the final session of the Japanese Peace Conference.
The occupation of Japan ended in 1952, and the country was again suzerain over its own territory. The Japanese economy began climbing out of the post-war impoverishment, and by the 1960s had entered a period of high growth and increased urbanization. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics served as the country's de facto coming out as a returned member of the Brotherhood of Nations. Many of the events were held just south of Shinjuku. By now, the black markets were long gone. Kabukicho was beginning to take a form very similar to what we know now. The Olympics served as an excuse to greatly expand the Shinjuku Station West Terminal. The West Station area, still a wide aquifer, was about to evolve into a more familiar form. The Yodobashi water purification plant had been hit by the 1945 firebombings, but had been spared complete destruction. By 1960, however, plans were underway to shift the plant's operations further west to a new facility in the prefectural suburb of Higashiyamamura City. Staff and operational capabilities moved there piecemeal until the Yodobashi plant essentially shut down in 1965. In 1971, the area played host to the first true high-rise in Shinjuku, the 200-meter-tall, 47-floor Keio Plaza Hotel. 1971 is also the year that Kabukicho's Club I, one of Shinjuku's very first host clubs, opened to the east of the station. Once the Keio Plaza had arisen, it was followed by a vertical forest of ferroconcrete and glass towers. The massive conglomerates of Sumitomo, Mitsui, and KDDI all completed even taller skyscrapers in 1974. Easily identifiable sloping facade of the Sampo Japan building appeared in 1976. At least one new megatall would grace the Nishi Shinjuku skyline almost every year well into the early 2000s. With the birth of the West Shinjuku skyscraper cluster upon the dried bones of the purification plant, Shinjuku was entering into a new era. one where the district was not only the heart of Tokyo transit, shopping, nightlife, and vice, but also home to the great business giants of Japan. The local tram line, a nostalgic site for those who knew the Shinjuku of the earlier part of the 20th century, shut down in 1970. The green line that runs from Yasukuni Avenue besides Golden Gai is a remnant of the tram line's once busy track. But another now familiar Shinjuku site was coming into being in the 1970s, the bright, advertisement-strewn exteriors of the multi-tenant Yasukuni Avenue mid-rises. These had originally been low-rise single-business eateries and offices along a recently widened avenue fronting the newly named Kabukicho district. In the early 1970s, developers swooped up these plots and replaced the low-rises with a row of much taller 8 to 10 floor buildings. While relatively high, these buildings occupied the same small plots as their predecessors, giving them their iconic thin and tall look. These are the famed Zakyo-style buildings of Shinjuku, recognizable the world over. Each floor generally hosts a separate business with small elevators accessible from street level, taking the customers directly to their destination. In the 1970s, many of these businesses were offices, banks, or restaurants, and as consumer trends shifted and Kabukicho grew, the tenants became even more varied. Izakaya, shot bars, karaoke joints, pachinko, mahjong, manga cafes, retail shops, game centers, darts bars. The Yasukuni Avenue Zakyo buildings are a shining microcosm of the endless variety of offerings to be had throughout the warrens of Shinjuku. Their illuminated vertical signage signals the mass of possibilities awaiting the millions who venture into the district each day. Near the western terminus of the Zakyo cluster emerged another iconic illuminated symbol, the Kabukicho Ichibangai Arch. The now famous red curves and twinkling lights of the arch embody Kabukicho more than any other single symbol. The original form of the arch appeared in 1956, just as the district was starting to gain popularity. This was a simple wide arch with Kabukicho written out in English lettering. In 1969, a stockier version of the arch went up, this time featuring the now iconic Kabukicho Ichibangai signage. During the 1970s, the modern design finally appeared, with two red inverse curves topping each other strewn with flashing light bulbs. The design has been maintained ever since, including in the popular Sega video game series Yakuza Like a Dragon, although of course Kabukicho is called Kamurocho in that series. Although the light bulbs were swapped out for LEDs starting in 2013. In other words, midway through the 1970s, the frontage of Kabukicho had taken on much the same form as we know today. In part, this is due to the flexibility of the Zakyo-style buildings. From emergent Tokyo, Zakyo buildings, with their capacity to grow, change their function over time, and reinvent themselves, offer a more robust infrastructure for urban self-regeneration. Around half of the Yasukuni Avenue buildings still date back to the 1970s. Shinjuku was now the core of modern, economically vital Japanese capitalism. In the 1970s, this was occurring under the watchful eye of Tokyo's smiling governor, the self-declarative utopian Marxist Minobe Ryokichi, well known to followers of this channel. In 1971, Shinjuku instituted one of his pet policies, a pedestrian heaven, a Hokosha Tengoku, pedestrianized street. The carless free-for-all still occurs every Sunday on Shinjuku's own Scramble intersection, a much smaller version of the famed Shibuya Scramble right next to the Shinjuku East Gate that opened in 1971. Shinjuku, and the country as a whole, was rushing towards an even more consumer-oriented national culture. At the same time, the late 1960s and early 70s was a time of burgeoning youth radicalism, and Shinjuku was no exception. In the late 1960s, Shinjuku was a very popular destination for radical youth to gather and have music sessions, often in very large groups. Shinjuku was popular, and the popular youth culture of the day was one of political activism. Then, on October 21st, 1968, the station played host to one of the seminal moments of radical protest in the history of the Japanese New Left. 2,000 members and hangers-on of some of the radical sects of the day, the still extant Chukakuha, the Marx-Lenin faction, and the Fourth International, amassed at the East Exit Square. Their goal? The storming of Shinjuku Station. The demonstration was part of a mass national day of protest against Japan's support for the Vietnam War. Moreover, it directly targeted Shinjuku Station because of the transit system's involvement with the shipping of US war material. Indeed, a large explosion had erupted at the station a year earlier, caused by the collision of an American military tanker car. The radicals, armed with staves and wearing their usual hard hats with individual sect logos, engaged thousands of riot cops in hand-to-hand battle. Meanwhile, numerous radicals broke into the station, ripping seats from trains and setting them alight at the south exit. 20,000 onlookers swelled the rioters' ranks, and Shinjuku Station shut down entirely as the police's tear gas pervaded the air. A train stoppage was in effect until the next morning, by which time 743 individuals were under arrest. Undeterred, hundreds of New Left demonstrators would again invade Shinjuku Station on the same date the following year. The crackdown on the radical youth culture around Shinjuku had the effect of chasing many of the youth further south. Shibuya and Harajuku emerged as new areas popular amongst the youth as Shinjuku faded in this respect, mainly because it was no longer considered a safe space to engage politically. By the 1980s, the radical Shinjuku of the previous decade was a near-forgotten memory. In its place was the partying, all-consuming nexus of a society that had just entered the economic stratosphere, the bubble era. In spite of various police campaigns to get hostess club touts off the streets, and a string of love hotel murders and Taiwanese gang wars leading to an even more negative perception of the district, the Kabukicho of the 1980s was a raucous place. Money flowed into ever gaudier hostess clubs and cabarets. The bubble era resulted in massively inflated land prices. Kabukicho, home to thousands of small-scale bars, clubs, and businesses of ill repute, became a major focus for redevelopment. Golden Gai, with its 300 tiny, aging bars, was an especially tempting target. Bar owners, many of whom ran their businesses for the sake of the vibrant communities they fostered more than mere profit motive, had to actively resist motivated developers. When they refused land buyouts, the developers would often send in the Yakuza to partake in jiage, land raising. Threats of violence and the occasional arson drove some Golden Gai bar owners to sell, but most managed to hold on through the turbulence of the asset price bubble era. The bubble finally popped in early 1922, and with it went the will of mass redevelopment. With the population less inclined to spend extraneous money on frivolity, some businesses shuttered, and the hostess and host club industry contracted. Kabukicho and Shinjuku were somewhat diminished. But nonetheless, a new structure in West Shinjuku proved the district's final ascendance as the core of Tokyo, the Tokyo Metropolitan Building, the seat of the Tokyo prefectural government. The tallest city hall in the world, the two-pronged 48-story structure opened in 1991 and cemented the move from the old eastern center of Tokyo to the newfangled western population centers of modern Tokyo. Shinjuku was here to stay. While the 90s saw the collapse of the bubble-era highlife, East Shinjuku was experiencing a new boom, an expanding and vibrant gay party scene. Shinjuku Nichome, the second district of Shinjuku, had emerged as home to the world's highest concentrated area of LGBTQ bars. Shinjuku Nichome, a square district of 3 blocks surrounded by major roads on 3 sides, sits just north of the Shinjuku Gyoen Gardens. In other words, it's located in the area of the old Naito Shinjuku post town. Accordingly, the frontage areas of Nichome and neighboring Sanchome to the west were sites where the legacy of the prostitution of the samurai era continued well into the 1940s. With the illegalization of this industry in 1956, the old houses of ill repute dwindled. In the mid-1960s, gay bars started to move into the vacant buildings of Nichome. The local gay scene, previously a scattering of establishments around Shinjuku, started to coalesce. Soon, Nichome overtook Ueno as the center of gay life in Tokyo. Nichome grew not just via the Tokyo gay community, but with successive Japanese media booms focused on queer identities. Way back in 1965, there was a sex change boom, and the 80s had a major Nuhaf, a vague, potentially derogatory term for cross-dressers and trans women, boom. In the 1990s, the biggest and longest-lasting boom of all was the gay boom, which lasted from 1991 to 1994 and saw gay men represented positively in Japanese TV, magazines, manga, and more. The public knew of Shinjuku Nichome as the site to engage with these depicted communities. These days, Nichome is home to over 300 gay bars, nightclubs, host and hostess clubs, pride boutiques, and more, offering both open establishments that welcome all to bars and clubs specifically for those of specific orientations or identities. While the area is described at times as conversely warm and as gentrified, and has lost some ground via increased land prices following the opening of the Fukutoshin line at Sanchome Station, it remains a major linchpin in the Japanese LGBTQ scene.
ニューヨークとかアメリカのゲイタウンにはこういうお店が普通に主流であってですね。
お店に来ていた外国人のゲイの方に日本の男性の印象を伺ってみると
I like their intelligence and they're cute.
This is fitting since subaltern groups have played a major role throughout Shinjuku's history. Indeed, since 1987, Shinjuku Ward has hosted the highest foreign population of any of the 23 wards of central Tokyo. As of 2024, this constituted 43,897 people, or about 14.5% of the ward's total population of 305,329 people. Visits to Kabukicho in the evenings might get an impression of an even higher percentage, given the sheer number of foreign visitors at any time. Just north of Kabukicho is the appealing Shin-Okubo neighborhood, Tokyo's very own Koreatown and now home to many of South and Southeast Asian descent. Kabukicho itself, while still a Japanese-facing district in many ways, has since the early 2000s been more and more internationalized. This includes on the criminal front, with Chinese tongs and triads joining the Yakuza, both ethnic Japanese and Korean, in taking advantage of the inherent profitability of the red light district. Nigerian touts were omnipresent until recent years and still operate out of Kabukicho despite police crackdowns limiting their previously more obvious operations. Kabukicho has often stood in as a totem for grime and crime throughout Japan. Powerful prime ministers like Koizumi Junichiro, who was in office from 2001 to 2006, and Abe Shinzo, who during his longest period in office from 2012 to 2020, spoke on the need to purify the area and toured Kabukicho to help grasp its urban reality. Perhaps surprisingly, both had the tact to not specify foreign criminal elements as the target of this purification in comparison to the homegrown Yakuza. Although the noted ultranationalist Tokyo governor Ishihara Shintaro, who was in office from 1999 to 2012, was another matter. Within Shinjuku, Kabukicho remains a place of strange tensions. The district is frequented by thousands and thousands of people, yet home to very few. The land and buildings are generally owned by absentee landlords. These landlords benefit from both the drinking and shopping industries, but also profit from the gray zone sex industry. At the same time, they've often stood in opposition to the illegal touts and roaming street advertisers who used to so aggressively woo potential customers or new recruits to their seedy industries. Meanwhile, the new Kabukicho is a place where one sees almost as many foreign tourists as local revelers. This is a major change from the Shinjuku of even 15 years ago. Until the coming of the massive inbound tourism boom starting in 2016, the vast majority of those visiting and consuming in Shinjuku were Japanese. Some of these overseas visitors are part of a new breed of sex tourist, and a new section of the Kabukicho industry is trying to appeal to them. For the most part, though, foreign tourists in Kabukicho are only vaguely aware of the realities of the huge red light industry there. One can see families with young children walking the streets hoping to visit Don Quixote or see the giant head of Godzilla looming above the Toho building. The government, interested in tourist dollars, has actively pushed illegal touts and recruiters off the streets, making the average visitor's experience more comfortable. And yet, this can hardly change the reality lurking in the peripherals of an expansive neighborhood still firmly grounded in hundreds of businesses providing paid intimacy. Shinjuku, however, is more than the sum of its parts. Kabukicho attracts and repels, playing its role as Tokyo's great seedy underbelly. But for the millions who make their way through Shinjuku every day, the district has much more to offer. In fact, offering whatever the passerby or commuter might need is exactly what Shinjuku does. Shopping, eating, drinking, entertainment, nature, housing, municipal services, education, museums, religion, art, transit on the grandest scale. Shinjuku is everything to everyone. At any given moment, more people than you can imagine are engaged in more activity than the human mind can comprehend. That's Shinjuku. From humble beginnings as a rural road to a feudal metropolis, to one of Earth's greatest centers of frenzied activity, Shinjuku has earned its reputation as the new core of the world's most populated urban expanse. Whether it's your exact cup of metropolitan tea or not, in Tokyo, you'll inexorably be drawn into its endless, labyrinthian embrace. Alright Mina, thanks for watching yet another extensive video here on UJ. Sorry for the long gap between videos. parenting is a time-intensive occupation, it turns out, and as the source list might clue you in on, I did a lot of reading and research for this one. I also engaged in a lot of on-the-ground filming and spoke with numerous old-timers and locals about the history of Shinjuku, including an in-law who was born in Shinjuku in the 1930s, and who lived through much of the history here in Tokyo we spoke about today. The next video is coming out more quickly. I promise, yakusoku. As always, if you like this one, feel free to like and subscribe, and maybe consider taking a tour with us if you're here in Japan. You can also support us directly over on Patreon, and I'm happy to report that from now on, the Patreon is also allowing access to Unseen Japan Insider. These are extra newsletters and articles that offer a lot of insight not only into Japan itself, but into travel here. It's still true, I couldn't create videos like these without you guys. I still use no AI in my writing, my research, my video editing, or my narration. Your support allows this sort of intensive human work to continue. Taihen kansha shite orimasu. So, until next time, mata. The sale of food, clothing, and luxury items was all tightly curtailed. We're steel.
Iltam sumra rashupti ilatim.